Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and there are certain individuals whose quality of soul elevates all around him. If that individual is one who can also express insights and feelings and understandings in the written word, what a blessing that person is. On this edition of L'Chaim, I have a chance to welcome back one of my favorite people in the world. I love him very, very much, Yossi Klein Halevi.
Thank you,
And
Mark.
Yossi Klein
It's very mutual.
You're wonderful. Yossi Klein Halevi has written again a wonderful book. We spoke about Like Dreamers many times here on JBS, and that was a fabulous look into an arc of Israeli life from the 67 war to the 73 war. Now Yossi has written Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, published by HarperCollins. It's an extraordinary book that should be a part of every Jewish home's library. Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, in essence, expresses the theme of the book. But I want you to know, Yossi, every single page has so much richness in it that as I prepare to talk to you on L'Chaim today, I said to myself, every page could be a L'Chaim program in and of itself.
Wow.
Mazal Tov on a fabulous.
Thank you so much, Mark.
And by the way, it's a courageous book. It's a courageous book. And it's a book now I want to push you on. I want to ask you all the questions I hope Jewish readers have when they pick up this book. And we were speaking for a moment off camera. Although it's to your Palestinian neighbor, how do you feel it relates to the Jewish community?
Well, first of all, Mark, thank you for those warm words, and really reciprocated. And I love being on your show. I love you, and I love everything that you're trying to do for the Jewish people. So thank you. The book really has two intended audiences. One is obvious, and that's my Palestinian neighbor. I live in, as you know, in a Jerusalem neighborhood called French Hill. And I live in literally the last row of houses.
And you write about that in the book.
Yes, and it's the last row of houses in Jerusalem. And just outside my window is the wall, the security barrier. And then I look out at Palestinian villages. I hear the muezzin 5 times a day. When I have insomnia, I hear it through the night. And so I live with that very complicated landscape in my living room. And so I was pacing late one night and looking out at this view and started to speak to an imaginary Palestinian neighbor on the other side of the wall.
Really?
Yeah, I'm just saying, here's everything that you don't understand about Israel, about the Jewish people, everything that your media is not telling you about who we are. We're neighbors, and yet we know nothing about each other. And that was going on for a while. I have
internally?
Internally, and then one night I just started writing, Dear Neighbor. And here's what I wish you understood about Israel and the Jewish people and about our story.
And I want to make sure the audience understands. First of all, you write movingly about how this, in essence, you've been inside the Palestinian world.
Yes.
First as a soldier, and then you went into the Palestinian community to learn about them.
Yes, yes.
Now your goal is you would like to help them learn about you and us. Do I have it right?
You have it exactly right.
Okay.
I consider this book a kind of sequel, a belated sequel, to a book that I published in 2001 called At the Entrance to the Garden of Eden, which told the story of a journey that I took into Palestinian society to try to listen to them, to understand their narrative, to understand Palestinian Islam and Christianity, the faiths of my neighbors. I went into mosques and monasteries. I spent a year on that journey. And this, as you say, this is really an attempt to now, in a way, reverse the dynamic and explain to my Palestinian neighbors who I am, why I left New York City in 1982 to move to the Middle East, and why I raised a family in Israel, why the Jewish people came home. And so this is really an attempt to explain the Jewish and Israeli story to Palestinians and by extension to the Middle East. The book has been translated into Arabic. It is available for free downloading in Arabic. We've posted it this week, and we will be promoting it in various Arabic language social media. And my goal is to initiate the first public conversation between an Israeli writer and Palestinians and Arabs generally about Israel's indigenousness, about our rootedness in that land.
Who's the our?
The Jewish people. That this is what I've tried to do in this book, is tell a Jewish narrative for the Palestinians. That's one audience, and my goal is to invite responses. I've already begun getting responses, and I am committed to respond to any letter, no matter how difficult, that's written in a reasonable spirit, and to see where that takes us. I want to take this to the Arabic media. You know, we rightfully complain about how our story is maligned and distorted in the Palestinian media, in the Arab media generally. But no one has ever thought of explaining our story
in our own
to
voice.
Our neighbors, in our own voice.
In our own voice.
This is who we are. This is why I'm living on the hill across from you. This is why we came home. But that's, as you indicated before, that's one audience. The second audience is I'm very mindful that this book will be read. I hope it will be read by American Jews, especially young American Jews.
Absolutely.
And I'm excited at the thought of young American Jews who may be feeling disaffected toward Israel, or certainly confused, that this is a kind of guide for the perplexed on Israel and for the 21st century.
Oh, I am thrilled that you said it that way. You're careful to explain at the same time that you're explaining to the Palestinian reader the Jewish perspective. And I'm using the word perspective consciously. I do not yet want to use the word narrative. I don't want to use the word story. By the way, you use the word story often in your book. I don't want to use the word story.
I'm a writer.
Okay, there's a perspective the Jew has. And you not only explain the perspective the Jew has to your Palestinian reader, you also do a fabulous job explaining to your Palestinian reader how we view his perspective. So that if a Jew picks up this book, he's going to read two things. He or she is going to read two things. One, what do we want the Palestinian to know about our perspective? But you're telling also the Jewish reader what you believe the Palestinian wants us to understand about his perspective. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what comes out to me, and I want you to speak to this, is the anguish of the Jew in Israel. There is anguish in the predicament. You call it at the end of the book a paradox. There is an anguish to being a caring, sensitive, aware Jew living in Israel in the 21st century and the heir to 19th and 20th century Zionism. And what I feel comes through in this book, louder than I've heard in any other, is the honest, intellectual, emotional anguish. And the anguish that I hear coming through the book, which I want you to speak to, is there is a concern you have that as passionate as you are in your love for the state of Israel, as much as you feel it is the Jew coming home, you also write about the extent to which the Palestinian has the right to feel dispossessed. You talk about, I can no longer ignore your story of invasion, occupation, and expulsion. And your book reflects your anguish over the fact that you live with their pain.
Yeah.
And I want you to speak, you know, you refer to this also at the very beginning of the book, guilty Israelis. And you put it in quotation marks, and then, Yossi, you follow it with a sentence that begins, we. You identify with what you define as guilty Israelis.
I identified, past tense, with guilty Israelis because what I explain in that context, and then I'll address your previous question, is I write about how the first Intifada of the late 1980s, early 90s created a very large camp of what I call guilty Israelis. I served in the Gaza refugee camps in the first Intifada. I write about the experience in the book. And I emerged from that experience, I'd say a guilty Israeli, feeling guilty in the sense that Israel, I felt, had never made a credible offer to the Palestinians. That changed in 1993, when Yitzhak Rabin initiated, with Shimon Peres, initiated the Oslo process and began reaching out to the Palestinian national movement and took an enormous gamble on trying to make peace with Yasser Arafat, who had more Jewish blood on his hands than any world leader in the post-Holocaust era. And I remember, and I write this in the book, seeing the handshake on the White House lawn and thinking, really? Have we just made the greatest, or one of the greatest mistakes in our history? My answer today, and the answer that I affirm in the book, is yes. The Oslo process was an enormous mistake. We took a gamble on a leader and his movement, which had no intention of making peace with us. And so the first Intifada created the camp of guilty Israelis. The second Intifada of the year 2000, the 4 years of suicide bombings, which followed two Israeli initiatives of Prime Minister Ehud Barak to make peace, to create a two-state solution. And then we get 4 years of suicide bombings in return. The second Intifada destroyed the camp of guilty Israelis. And I am no longer part of that camp.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
So that's in the book. That's a very important point in the book that I want my Palestinian neighbor to understand. And what I'm trying to explain to my neighbor is, how do I live with the wall outside my window? How do I live with a roadblock within view? I can see a roadblock. How do I live with the 5 a.m. desperate line of cars? I hear the honking at the roadblock, and these are cars that are lining up for hours. And I live with it the way most Israelis live with it today, as we're living with what's happening on the Gaza border every week. We live with it because of the second Intifada and because of what we learned about the profound rejection of the Palestinian national movement in all its factions of my legitimacy, my rootedness in that land. And so the story that I'm trying to tell my neighbor begins with the first Intifada, but it really culminates with the second Intifada.
Okay. You talk about narratives in the book. I hear this all the time. There's the Jewish narrative, the Palestinian narrative. I feel one of the things you're saying to us in the book is the Jew has to have respect for the Palestinian narrative. Do I misunderstand you?
Respect and not agreement. Because what I do in the book is go back to the origins of Zionism. I walk the reader through Partition, 1947, 1948, what the Palestinians call the Nakba, what we call the miracle of the creation of the state, the expulsion of Jews from the entire Arab world, close to 1 million Jews in the Arab world in 1948, less than 40,000 today, and the Jewish Nakba, if one wants to call it that. Our understanding of why and how the Six-Day War happened. And so I walk the Palestinian reader and whoever is eavesdropping on this conversation through my understanding. And I have to emphasize, this is my understanding. You know, it's my perspective. It's a very personal perspective of Jewish history, of Judaism, what Judaism means, what it means to me as a religious Jew, a religious Israeli. And so my argument in the book is really twofold in terms of narrative. One is that our narrative needs to be defended because it is under systematic assault. And that's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book to defend my narrative, not to explain my neighbor's narrative. There are enough people doing that. But in the book, I am also addressing my neighbor's narrative. I write where I deeply disagree with that narrative.
Yes, you do.
And I disagree with that narrative all the way through, up until today's headlines about why the riots in Gaza are happening on the Gaza border. I disagree with my neighbor's narrative on just about everything. And yet, I recognize that even if we ever reach a two-state solution, we're going to remain with a two-narrative problem, which means that we need to somehow accommodate these two stories. Now, if I'm asking my neighbor to listen to my story, and that's what I'm doing in this book, I'm telling my neighbor, your society has systematically distorted and lied about my story. And here's my story. And if I'm expecting my neighbor to listen, and I do have Palestinians who are already responding, then I need to be able to listen to my neighbor's narrative, my neighbor's pain, whether or not I agree with how my neighbor understands the causes for that tragedy. What I try to do in this book, Mark, is stretch my capacity for empathy.
I know.
Without, but this is the second crucial point, without compromising the integrity of the Jewish narrative. And that's a really hard balancing act. And you know, in the Jewish community, we tend to speak about the Palestinians in one of two ways. We're either angry at the Palestinians or we're apologetic, depending on what your politics are.
Absolutely right.
And what I try to do in this book is avoid both of those dead-end approaches. I don't yell at my neighbor. Occasionally I get angry, but for the most part, I cut most, I had a lot of anger in the book initially, a lot of anger. And then I realized, you know, it's not productive. The purpose of this book is to tell my story, not to be angry at my neighbor for his story. And I say that in the book. I'm not going to tell you what your story is, but I'm asking you to listen to my story because not only because I'm ready to listen to your story, but because I have listened to your story. I invested a year going through Palestinian society, listening. That was
more than listening.
And then writing
More
the
than
book.
Listening. By the way, you write, I love Islam. You love Islam?
I do.
Explain
You
how
want me to unpack that?
Yeah. How is that possible? And you know, are there places in which, and you write about this also movingly, and how what religious conviction and belief is for a human being, what it means for you, and you talk about how you believe that ultimately the religious person transcends any specific, and that what you hope is in the Middle East, in this conflict, ultimately religious people will be able to talk to each other out of that experience of the divine. And then each religious tradition may respond to it in its own way. But we're all responding to a common experience. The Jewish tradition calls it, the Shekhinah and the presence, and every religious tradition expresses it in its own way. At the same time, I say to myself, there is a fundamental difference in what Islam teaches it means to be a human being, what life is on this earth, as opposed to what rewards you're going to get afterward, diametrically opposed to what the Jewish tradition teaches it means to be a person dealing with problems and death. And you write also about how you somehow were moved by the way in which the Islamic tradition deals with human mortality.
So let me try to unpack some of that. Before I get to why I learned to love Islam, let me talk a little bit about the need to not demonize Islam. Because there are some in our community who think that they're doing us a great favor. They think they're defending the Jewish people in Israel by portraying 1.7 billion Muslims as intrinsic enemies of the Jewish people and Islam as an evil faith. Now, I have run a program for the last 6 years, and we've talked about this, called the Muslim Leadership Initiative, MLI. And I run this together with my partner, Imam Abdullah Antepli, a Turkish-born imam who now heads Muslim affairs at Duke University. Mm-hmm. And this is a program we run with the Shalom Hartman Institute, where I'm a fellow. I've been a fellow there for many years. And we bring groups of emerging young Muslim American leaders to the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and we teach Israel, Judaism, and Zionism. This program has been under vicious attack in the Muslim American community, and yet it is now a permanent part of the landscape.
I'm very proud of you.
So, well, thank you. Thank you. And what this program is saying to us is, in Hebrew we have an expression, ein im mi ledaber, there's no one to talk to on the other side. Yesh im mi ledaber. We really have partners, potential partners. And I'm speaking right now about American Islam, because that's who the program is directed to. We now have interest in Germany, in England. And so this is a program that was initiated by Abdullah and his friends. They came to me. I didn't go out looking for Muslims to teach about Israel. I didn't think there was any chance. And what's so powerful about this program is that we're dealing with mainstream leaders in the Muslim community. Okay. We're dealing with people who are not friends of Israel. Certainly when they start out, very hostile to Israel.
Okay. I just want to understand what it means for Yossi Klein Halevi, a passionately committed Jew, to write in this book, I Love Islam.
My approach to religion is more experiential than theological. And I think that's a very Jewish approach. Judaism, of course, we have our theology, but really Judaism emphasizes what you do. Mitzvot, the commandments, the experience, Shabbat. Judaism is a tactile experience. And so I brought my Judaism into my encounter with Islam and Christianity. I wrote about both faiths, and I would say that I have love for Christianity as well. Now, I grew up in a Holocaust survivor family where Christianity was basically a synonym for Nazism. For my father, a survivor from Hungary, there was no difference between the church and Nazism. One fed the other. They were hand in glove. And that was my father's experience in Hungary. It is not my experience as a Jew in the 21st century. And so I live in a privileged moment where I have been able to experience something of the inner beauty of Christianity without accepting its theology, but to have friendships with monks and nuns, to learn meditation from silent sisters in Israel. These are powerful experiences that I had. And this is what I wrote about in that book, The Garden of Eden. I also had powerful experiences in Islam. I was looking in Islam for a taste of the experience of what it means when Muslims say they surrender to God. And I was privileged to be admitted on a number of occasions into the Muslim prayer line. And I write about that in the book. And it is a very potent prayer experience. You feel that you are part of this great wave of prayer that preceded you long before you were born. It's going to continue long after you die. And there is this sense of very powerful sense of God's presence coming through. And after that, after experiencing the Muslim prayer line and that prayer mat, the pew, is a little pallid in comparison. There's really power in Muslim prayer.
More so than in Jewish prayer.
Well, I won't say more so than in Jewish prayer. I've had very powerful.
Because we do have the pew.
Yes, but I've had very powerful experiences with Hasidic groups, with really powerful prayer experiences.
Without a pew.
Without a pew. Yeah. I mean, I grew up in Borough Park, which is Hasidic, the great Hasidic community of Brooklyn, and I grew up in a shtibel.
Okay,
and so that was my prayer experience.
I understand. I'm going to tell you what I feel, and you can tell me I'm totally wrong. I felt you tried to be as understanding and embracing of your Palestinian reader as you could be, because you knew the things you were saying about the Jewish perspective, how you feel as a Jew coming back to Israel, was going to, and you used the word, it was going to hurt them. It was going to be, the word you used was painful, that it was going to be painful for them. And I had the feeling that you wanted to be, while being as honest as you could be out of the Jewishness and the experience and love you have of Israel, you wanted to be as, I'll use the word again, embracing and understanding and loving of the Palestinian, your neighbor, as you could be. And I felt there were times when you wrote things for them that were not as literally true as a Jewish reader might read it. When you say, I love Islam, when you describe it to me here, it's very different than when I read it. Because what I love Islam said to me when I read it was, oh, Yossi Klein Halevi embraced Islam. What I now hear you saying is, there were experiences I had within the Muslim world which touched me. And for them, in those moments, I could say, there was something there I loved.
What I talk about,
what
I talk about in the book, I would say, are three aspects of Islam that I love. One is prayer. The second is the Muslim surrender to God.
Are you saying to me
yes,
that surrender to God is something that ever resonates to you as a Jew?
Let me unpack it.
Okay.
I write about the way in which the Torah describes Abraham's response to the imminent destruction of Sodom, and the way the Quran describes Ibrahim's response to the imminent destruction of Sodom. In the Torah, of course, Abraham argues with God, and God plays along. God is intrigued. God is pleased by Abraham's holy rebellion against heaven for the sake of heaven. It's very, very powerful. That speaks to me as a Jew very deeply. The Quran's version is a little different. Ibrahim finds out that God intends to destroy Sodom, and he starts arguing with God, and God tells him effectively, shut up. It might have even been exactly those words. And God says to Ibrahim, I'm God. You're not. I know, you don't. And Ibrahim surrenders to God's will. Now, in my religious makeup, I have both of those responses. There is the part of me, the Jew, that argues, And there's also the part of me that says, you know, you can argue, but we really think we know. We think we understand. We think we're so smart, and we don't understand anything about this universe. We don't understand anything about our own lives. We don't even know. We don't know who we are, where we came from, where we're going. We have these faces, these names that were given to us that we're going to part with very soon, 70 years, 80, 90 years. It's a blink of an eye. And there is something in the Muslim wisdom, which is also in the Jewish tradition, by the way. That sense of surrendering to God's will, you find it in the Hasidic tradition. You find it in Musar. You find it is in Judaism. It's not in modern Judaism. Modern Judaism loves the idea of Abraham arguing with God, but we've suppressed the other side of our tradition.
Okay.
So what I cherish, what I resonate with in Islam, is that ability to say, God, you know, I'm nothing. There's a great Hasidic teaching, and I'm sure you know this, which is that a human being needs to have two notes in either pocket. One note says, for me the world was created, and that you could say that's Abraham arguing with God in the Jewish tradition. The other note is, from dust I came and to dust I return. And that's Ibrahim saying to God, wow, you know, you're right.
I say this is hubris on my part, arrogance on my part. I don't believe you. I don't believe Yossi Klein Halevi does not revel in joy with Abraham telling God, are you telling me that the God of justice will not...
Yes, of course.
So
but that's not the only, Mark, that's not the only side of it.
Yes, it is.
No.
Yes, it is. And by the way, when you say God enjoyed it, not in the Torah, he did not enjoy it. That's Midrash. That's your understanding of what Judaism is. Judaism is, how did the rabbis take this text and develop it?
Nope. I profoundly disagree.
Tell me where in the Torah it says God was pleased that Abraham argued him down to 10. In the Torah, tell me where.
No, it doesn't say.
Okay, so don't tell me that when you read the Torah, it says it. That comes out of your understanding of a long Jewish tradition.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And there's, in the Jewish tradition, the message that we've learned, which I believe you live it every day, is that when you see injustice, you have a right to rail against it, even if it comes from God. And by the way, you may take that story literally. It never occurs to me that there's a real God who one day said to a real human being, I'm going to destroy a city, and that individual argued the real God down from total destruction to, if he could find 10 righteous people, he won't.
So here's where
this is a whole,
Mark,
this is a metaphor.
Mark, that's for you as a Reform rabbi.
Not as a Reform rabbi. Excuse me. That's all Midrash.
Okay,
it has nothing to do with Reform.
I believe the story.
Literally.
Sure. I am a traditional Jew.
Traditional Jews read Midrash all the time.
I believe.
Okay.
I believe the story literally.
Okay. And if you believe the story literally, was Abraham right? The story leads up to will the God of justice not do justly? The
fact that God plays along with him.
Why do you say play along? He didn't play along.
He
doesn't let.
He's arguing.
But wait, you just said you read the Torah as an Orthodox Jew. God doesn't let Abraham do anything. God learns from Abraham at that moment. And God says, yes, you're right.
I don't read it that way.
Well, by the way, there's no way to know which one of us is
right.
Okay,
so I'm telling you,
now I'm going to ask you,
I'm telling you that I don't believe that God learns from us.
Okay, you don't?
No.
Okay.
Absolutely. I believe that God is God.
Okay, so then God wanted Abraham to argue him down to 10.
Yes.
Very good. Yes, I'll buy that too. Incidentally, in the Midrash, the classic Midrash, where ultimately the still small voice says, what are you hawking? You kosher an oven this way. And the rabbis say to God, butt out. You said the Torah is in our mouths, in our hearts, to do it. And we don't listen to voices from heaven. Jews don't listen to voices from heaven. And the Midrash ends with saying, My children are right, and my children have won. That's a Jewish notion. The idea of surrender is in a totally different area in Jewish life.
Mark, let's agree to disagree on this, okay?
All right.
Because my reading of that story from the rabbis is of a particular moment when prophecy was taken away from us. I don't see that as representing 4,000 years of Jewish thinking. I think one can find different traditions, different ideas, and so there is a part of that tradition that resonates for modern rational Jews. I'm not a modern rational Jew. You are. I'm not. And because of that, I read those parts of the tradition in a certain historical context, and I say, okay, this is certainly a part of Judaism, but I can find other examples in Judaism where we are not a rational, this worldly people. We love to say that. You know, the expression of this world is a prosdor, is only a passageway to the next world. That's a very powerful strain that goes through Judaism as well. And that really undermines the rational, modern Jewish notion of a relentless, this worldly religion. That's not my Judaism.
Very, very fair, very fair. Here I want to come back to your book. In your book, do you feel the Palestinian narrative in some way has a truth to it?
Sure it does.
Okay.
Sure it does.
What's the truth to it?
Ben Gurion, in 1947, explained why he accepted partition. And he said, you know, I believe all of this land is ours, just like Menachem Begin believes it. But there's one difference between us. I'm very aware of the fact that this story of Zionism is unique in world history. There has never been a people that lost its land and comes back home 2,000 years later. Now that's an extraordinary story. It's a glorious story. It's to my mind, one of the greatest stories of humanity, one of the greatest stories of hope and faith and courage. And it has been the great privilege of my life to be part of that story. But then Ben Gurion adds, that because this is such a unique story, we need humility. We need to realize we've come back. There's another people there. When they decided to call themselves a people, how you define, you know, all of those arguments, which I personally have very little patience for, and we can discuss why. There is another people there. And we need to recognize that we've come back. And there was a 2,000-year interruption. And I would add, Ben Gurion didn't say this, but this is what I understand. This is my midrash on Ben Gurion, is that there's a price that we paid for losing our land. There's a price that we paid for 2,000 years of exile. We were away. And that means we've come back. We have to share this land with another people. Now, I don't want to share this land. This land from the river to the sea, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, this little piece of land, which is the only land that the Jewish people has. I don't want to share that land. That's all mine. Of course it's mine. And my starting point is the same as the settlers, exactly the same. And I come from there. I grew up on the right. I grew up on the hard Jewish right. And that is still my emotional approach to this question. I loathe partition. I fear cutting this little land in two. I fear the security consequences, but more deeply than that, I dread the amputation of parts of the land of Israel. I love that land. When I see settlements, I involuntarily swell with pride. I said, look at what we've built. Look at the courage of these people defying the whole damn world and going out there and saying, no, it's ours. I resonate with that. And I have friends out there. And when I moved to Israel in 1982, I thought I actually signed up for a settlement. That was a group that was founding a settlement. And I say today, fortunately, I didn't go through with it. But that's where I come from. So, but that's my starting point. My end point is, if we're ever going to have a chance for reconciliation, we have to be ready to sacrifice what belongs to me. That land is not occupied territory for me. The West Bank is not the West. I don't call it the West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. And I say that to my neighbor in the book. I say, I'm sorry. That's all mine. But I understand that from your perspective, it's all yours. Now, I believe it's all mine. You believe it's all yours. We have one of two choices. We either continue fighting for another 100 years. Maybe I'll win. Maybe you'll wear us down and you'll win. Or we can do what Ben-Gurion tried to do in 1947, what has always been on the table almost since the origins of this conflict, and that's what I don't want to do, and you, my neighbor, don't want to do either. And that's cut up this land. And I call it in the book the injustice of partition. But we need to partition justice itself. When I give up Judea and Samaria, I am giving up what's mine. When Palestinians give up their claim to Haifa and Jaffa, they will give up what they believe is theirs. Now, my goal here is not to draw equivalence between my claim and their claim. I have a 4,000-year claim. I hold this claim second to none. My neighbor comes to me and says, yes, but you weren't here for 2,000 years. And my response, which I spend a good deal of time writing about in this book, is how my people maintained what I would call a vicarious indigenousness, an indigenousness from afar, which no people in history ever managed to do.
Think that's persuasive for a Palestinian?
I don't know.
Oh, you do? Of course it isn't.
No, Mark.
It is.
Mark, you know something? There's there's this Jewish pessimism.
It's not pessimism.
Listen. Have you ever tried to explain who we are to Palestinians? Most Palestinians, I'll grant you, most Palestinians will reject this. Some will not.
Okay.
And I'm already
I hope
getting...
you reach those who
No,
do.
I already am.
Okay.
And so, you know, when I get responses from Jews, oh, yeah, letters, so who's going to read it? And my response is, you know, we never tried to tell our story to them.
Absolutely.
So, I've tried.
And I give you kol hakavod in every respect. And by the way, I'm going to say this again. It's a brilliantly written book. It is a touching book. It's a moving book. It's a book Jews should read, and I hope Palestinians read as well. It doesn't mean, however, I don't know how efficacious it will be.
Oh, I don't know.
I want to come back to the question I asked you. You write in this book something which I never realized that the Palestinians said. I say it when I teach, but lo and behold, I read it in your book as it's a Palestinian model, the model of the squatter, where you describe the Palestinian perspective is, yes, if I own a house, and you come in and you say, I'm going to stay now in this house, I'll only keep 2 rooms, you keep 3. I'll only keep 1 room, you keep 4. You feel like you're being magnanimous because I'm getting to keep 4. It was my house, they say. I shouldn't have to give up any room.
Right.
You write about that. Okay. I asked you, is there any part of the Palestinian narrative which you believe is true? Is there truth that the Jew doesn't understand? I understand it from our perspective. You're writing about the Jewish truth. But you spend a great deal of time in your book showing the Jew or acknowledging to the Palestinian you're writing to, here, I understand you.
So let's look at certain aspects of their narrative. For many years, Israeli historiography suppressed, denied massacres that happened in 1948, expulsions. So we now know that there's truth to those claims. My response to my neighbor is yes, but there's a wider context, which is we accepted partition. We accepted a two-state solution in 1947. Your national movement and the whole Arab world then tried to destroy us because you wanted it all. We offered compromise. Now, does that mean that I accept the truth of the Palestinian narrative? To some extent, it means that yes, there are elements of the 1948 story which we now are facing. But even given those elements, I still believe that my narrative of 1948 is true, which is we tried to make peace. We tried to create a two-state solution, and your side said it's all or nothing because the house is all yours.
Does the Palestinians say that they said they were not for peace?
No, because they'll say it was all ours.
Yes.
It was so I don't agree with that.
Okay, so
this is what I'm trying.
A very tough question.
And Mark, I'm trying to answer. I gave you one example. Okay.
No, that's not
Example number one is that I now acknowledge, and I think most of us do, that there is some truth to what they were saying all along about what happened in 1948.
Yes, but that's not what I meant.
But I do not concede that that undermines the truth of my narrative.
Okay, I want to express the Palestinian truth from their perspective, even as you describe in the book. We were here. People from Europe came here. Yes, they had a relationship to this land many years ago. But they basically weren't here for many years, and we were. It became ours. This was our home. And the Zionists arrive and say to us, from now on, it's our home. Oh, you know what? We'll give you some of it. You took our land, and you destroyed us as a people. That's their narrative.
Yes.
The details are different. I don't care about the ultimate narrative is you
there
stole
are different
our land.
there are different elements in their narrative. That's the basic narrative, which I profoundly disagree with.
You do.
Of course I do. I write that in the book. You read it.
So what I mean by you do is, it's not. I know you disagree with it, but what you're saying is there's no truth to it.
There's not. Well, we did come from far away.
Yes.
That's true. Although there always were Jews living in the land of
Did we
Israel.
take somebody else's land?
No. We bought, and this is what I write in the book, is there were 3 phases of Israeli land acquisition. This is a very important point, and many Jews don't understand this. Phase number 1 was from the beginning of the Zionist movement, roughly 1882 to 1948, where every inch of the land that Jews settled on was purchased, often at exorbitant prices, from Arab landlords. That was phase 1. Phase 2 was the 1948 war, what we call the War of Independence. The Arab world attacks us, and we then, in the course of a defensive war, we expand our borders, which, from my point of view, is entirely legitimate by the rules of war and of international law. And the proof of that is that the international community accepts the state of Israel in its post-1948 borders. The third phase, which is the most controversial phase, is the land we acquired after 1967, which was also in a war of self-defense. Now, the argument that I have with the settlers is not that they're wrong in principle. From my point of view, they're right in principle. Number 1, that land is historically ours. Number 2, we acquired it in a war of self-defense against attempted destruction, which is to say that how we acquired the land in 67 was no different than how we acquired the land in 48. But there is one big difference. In 1948, we were not yet a state. In 1967, we already had a state. We had a homeland. We were building our country. Now we've expanded our borders, again, in a legitimate way. That's not my argument. When the Arab world says aggressor, my response is self-defense. And again, that's in there. And so where I disagree with the settlers is, what do we do now? Now, maybe the settlers will be proven right in the end. Maybe we'll never be able to reach an agreement with the Arab world, with the Palestinian national movement. It's very possible. And I'll live with that, and I'll live with those consequences. But I want to be sure that we have done everything possible we can do, and I'm not sure. I was sure 18 years ago, in the year 2000, when we made very serious offers twice, first at Camp David, then in accepting the Clinton proposals in December 2000. We made very serious offers, just as we did in 1947 when we accepted partition.
You also refer to Olmert in 08.
And Olmert in 08. There's a pattern here. Anytime there's an offer, a credible offer on the table that the international community proposes, we say yes, the other side says no. And I write in the book that I know of no national movement that has rejected more offers for statehood than the Palestinian National Movement. Now that has consequences. And so I am not when you say, do I endorse the Palestinian narrative, this book is an attempt to state my narrative, to state the Israeli narrative, or my understanding of the Israeli narrative. And it is not an attempt to balance. That's not at all my attempt. I am setting out here to defend my story and defend my country. But I'm also ready to listen, to engage. And this book is not a series of talking points. And the way that we usually engage with Palestinians is through either on the right through talking points, or on the left, I'm so sorry for everything we've done to you. Now, I'm not apologizing in this book, and I'm not attacking with talking points. I'm trying to do something different, something new, which is, this is my story. This is who I am. Do you want to tell me that I have no legitimacy? Then, okay, that's what you're telling me, but I'm going to tell you why you're wrong.
Yes, and it's, again, it is beautifully, wonderfully written. And you are able to express what has motivated the Jew as he returns to Israel, and how he has struggled to, in essence, share the land, and hasn't been given the opportunity to share the land.
So what I hope is that in addition to finding readers on the Palestinian side, in the Arab world, and you know, when you say, will it make a difference? It's not my concern. I'm a writer. I'm not a politician. And a writer has only one responsibility, to write. And to try to make the world a little bit more interesting, a little bit more colorful, a little more humane.
You give us insight.
So that's a writer's job.
Grow,
so that's a writer's job.
It's a gift.
And well, thank you.
It's a gift.
Thank you. But a writer's job is not to ask the question, is this going to change anything? I don't know. And then I realized something else, Mark, which is the same ideas that I need to explain to young Muslim Americans, I also need to explain to young American Jews, because they don't get it either anymore. What is peoplehood? What is land? What is this history? Why did we carry this story for 4,000 years? Why did we come back to a land that we lost? What is this strange story? And so what I realized as I was writing this book is, well, there's a whole other set of potential readers who I hope will come to this book. And that's a very different kind of conversation. My conversation with my Muslim neighbor, my Palestinian neighbor, is a religious conversation. And this is a very religious book. And without apologies, I'm writing from that place of being a religious Israeli living in Jerusalem and what my life is like, feeling that I am living the fulfillment of Judaism and Jewish history. And that's a religious experience for me. I understand that there are secular versions of that experience. This is my story. How young American Jews will relate to this religious story, I don't know. But you know, one of the things that really troubles me about the conversation in the American Jewish community about the next generation is I think that you're getting it, forgive me for it, this is my hubris, forgive me for saying that, I think you're getting it wrong. When American Jews say, how do we speak about Judaism in a language they'll understand? They are breaking with 4,000 years of Jewish pedagogy. Jews, our parents didn't ask, how are we going to get our kids to understand Judaism in their language? They didn't care what our language was. They wanted us to understand their language, and then go break your heads and figure out what this means to you. That's how Jewish continuity has worked for 4,000 years until this generation in America. Now suddenly, we're agonizing. How do we explain how do we get them to understand this in their language? I have written a book that is my language. I don't care. I mean, of course I care, but I don't care whether young American Jews will feel that I am trying to understand them or not. I am asking them a very difficult thing, which every generation of Jews has asked the next generation, which is, we want you to listen. We want you to listen. This is how we, your parents, lived the Jewish story.
You know, you were so wonderful.
Oh,
There's no one like you. The contribution you make to the Jewish people and to the state of Israel.
Oh, thank you.
Yotzei min haklal.
Toda rabba.
There you have it. Yossi Klein Halevi, his newest book as we speak, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, published by Hartman Institute. It is a beautiful read and one that will touch your heart and also challenge you in terms of where are you in terms of the entire spectrum. And you know, Yossi, there are many young Jews and not young Jews, Jews our age as well. They agonize over whether the Jewish people did the right thing by going to a land that they hadn't been in for roughly 2,000 years and establishing a state which has been in perpetual war from 1948 till the day we sit here together. And that pains me that any Jew would question it. Part of what you do here is give us an answer, and I thank you for it.
Thank you.
As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed by Yossi Klein Halevi on this edition of L'Chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.